The Trump administration is freezing $10 billion in funding for New York and 4 other states, claiming widespread fraud.
Now, the cuts target low-income families and also childcare.
Freeze comes after investigators probe welfare fraud in Minnesota, but the Trump administration provided no evidence of fraud in New York or the other states, including California, Illinois, and Colorado.
Something catastrophic just happened in federal court that has Trump administration in complete panic mode. Emergency injunction issued. $10 billion frozen, legal shield stripped, and I mean total courtroom chaos erupting. Federal judge issuing orders that White House lawyers calling unprecedented, constitutional crisis over presidential power. And this isn't about policy disagreement. This is about whether president can weaponize federal funding to punish political enemies without congressional approval or judicial review. Make sure you're subscribed because what I'm about to explain shows how federal court just dismantled Trump's final legal defense that administration has been hiding behind for entire first year of second term. Here's what just detonated in Manhattan federal court. Judge Aaron Subramanian issued emergency temporary restraining order late Friday afternoon blocking Trump administration from freezing $10 billion in federal funds to 5 Democratic-led states. California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, New York. States sued Thursday night, got emergency hearing Friday. 1 temporary restraining order within 24 hours. Share this video because mainstream media isn't explaining how unprecedented this emergency judicial intervention actually is. Think about what that timeline means. States filed lawsuit Thursday night. Federal court heard emergency arguments Friday. Judge issued restraining order before midnight. Friday, preventing Health and Human Services from implementing funding freeze that would have devastated millions of vulnerable families. That's federal judiciary moving at lightning speed because constitutional violation was so clear and immediate harm to families was so catastrophic that normal legal timelines couldn't apply. Trump administration sent letters January 5th and 6th to these 5 states. Department of Health and Human Services letters. Said administration had, quote, serious concerns about widespread fraud and misuse of taxpayer dollars, unquote. Froze $10 billion across 3 federal programs. Child Care Development Fund with $2.4 billion. Temporary assistance for needy families with $7.35 billion. Social Services Block Grant with $869 million. California alone would lose $5 billion, half the total freeze. Share this video so people understand what Trump administration actually tried to do here. This wasn't about fighting fraud. This was about punishing blue states. Notice what Health and Human Services couldn't provide when states sued. Any evidence, any data, any investigation results showing why these 5 Democratic-led states were targeted and 45 other states weren't. Attorney General Rob Bonta from California held press conference Friday afternoon. Said, quote, this funding was lawfully appropriated by Congress. Congress voted on this. A president signed budget bill appropriating this funding. The funding must be distributed under Article of U.S. Constitution, unquote. That's Constitutional Law 101. Congress appropriates funds. President executes congressional will. President cannot unilaterally cancel appropriations passed by Congress. Make sure you're subscribed because this gets even more devastating when you understand what programs Trump tried to defund and who would have been hurt. Child Care Development Fund subsidizes child care for low-income families while parents work or attend job training. Without these funds, working parents forced into impossible choice, miss work and lose income or leave children in unsafe situations. Temporary assistance for needy families helps families pay for food, housing, child care, job training. Modern successor to welfare. Social Services Block. Grant provides flexible funding states use to protect children, including foster care services. These aren't optional luxury programs. These are lifelines for most vulnerable Americans. New York Attorney General Letitia James explained exactly what Trump's funding freeze would mean. Quote, families will lose access to reliable childcare, forcing caregivers into impossible choice of either missing work or leaving children in potentially unsafe environment, unquote. That's not rhetoric. That's reality when federal funding supporting childcare for low-income families suddenly disappears. Think about timing here. Trump administration announced funding freeze Tuesday night. States had until what deadline to provide massive amounts of data Health and Human Services demanded? Personal identifying information of millions of residents, every recipient of these programs, social security numbers, addresses, family composition. States said this data request wasn't about investigating fraud. This was phishing expedition designed to identify and target immigrants and low-income families. Judge Subramanian heard emergency arguments Friday, looked at facts. Trump administration claiming fraud but providing zero evidence. 5 Democratic-led states targeted. 45 other states, including Republican states, untouched. Funding lawfully appropriated by Congress being frozen without congressional approval. Millions of vulnerable families facing immediate harm. Judge issued temporary restraining order blocking freeze for 14 days while legal arguments proceed. What judge actually wrote in his order explains why this is constitutional crisis, not ordinary legal dispute. Judge said 5 states met legal threshold, quote, to protect status quo, unquote, for at least 14 days. That language matters. Protecting status quo means preventing irreparable harm while courts decide legality. Judge didn't rule yet on whether funding freeze is legal, but judge recognized immediate emergency. Families would lose childcare access. Children would be put at risk. Working parents would face impossible choices, all based on Trump administration allegations of fraud with zero supporting evidence. Share this video so people understand pattern here. Health and Human Services General Counsel Mike Stewart posted on social media accusing lawsuit of being, quote, partisan political stunts, unquote. Said, quote, it's unfortunate that these attorneys general from these Democrat-led states are less focused on reducing fraud and more focused on partisan political stunts, unquote. Classic Trump administration playbook, accused of targeting blue states for political retaliation. Response is to accuse accusers of playing politics. Notice what Health and Human Services didn't do when asked for evidence. Didn't provide data showing fraud in these 5 states, worse than other 45 states. Didn't explain methodology for targeting exactly these jurisdictions. Didn't cite specific investigations justifying $10 billion funding freeze. Just pointed to social media posts calling lawsuits political. That's not how federal government's supposed to work. That's authoritarianism. Think about what House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi wrote in letters signed by 83 members of Congress demanding release of funding. Quote, Congress appropriated these funds to support children and families not to be withheld as political retribution, unquote. Pelosi using word retribution. That's former Speaker of House accusing sitting president of using federal funding as weapon against political opponents. Constitutional structure crystal clear on this. Article 1 grants Congress power of purse. Congress decides how federal money spent. President's job under Article 2 is to faithfully execute laws, including spending laws passed by Congress. President cannot decide he doesn't like how certain states voted and therefore freeze congressionally appropriated funds. That's usurpation of congressional power. What Minnesota situation reveals shows how Trump administration manufactured this entire fraud narrative to justify targeting blue states. Minnesota had fraud scandal involving emergency social services during COVID pandemic. Somali immigrants made up most perpetrators. Story gained traction in conservative media. Trump began calling for mass deportations of Somali immigrants. Right-wing influencers started looking for more examples of fraud. Viral video alleged fraud at daycare centers in Somali community. Trump administration cut off all federal childcare payments to Minnesota even though investigators found centers were operating as expected. Then administration expanded freeze to 4 other blue states using Minnesota as pretext. This pattern is what makes Judge Subramanian's emergency injunction so critical. Trump administration using unsubstantiated fraud allegations to freeze funding to states that didn't vote for Trump. Classic political retaliation disguised as fraud prevention. Federal courts saw through it in 24 hours. Notice what states argued in their emergency lawsuit. Trump administration lacked legitimate justification for funding freeze. Administration usurped Congress's constitutional power to allocate money. Freeze violated Administrative Procedure Act requiring notice and comment before major federal actions. Immediate irreparable harm to millions of vulnerable families. Judge agreed on all counts. Think about what California Attorney General Bonta said during Friday press conference. Quote, $5 billion of $10 billion at issue here is money that should go to California, and so millions of vulnerable Californians are being hurt now. Unquote. Not will be hurt, are being hurt now. That present tense matters. That's why Judge issued emergency restraining order. Harm wasn't theoretical future possibility. Harm was happening in real time. Judge Subramanian's order expires in 14 days. That gives both sides time to submit extensive legal arguments on whether cuts should be allowed or ban kept in place. But Judge's decision to grant emergency relief tells you everything about how he views Trump administration's legal position. If Trump had strong case for fraud-based funding, Freeze Judge wouldn't have blocked it on emergency basis. Judge blocked it because constitutional violations so clear and immediate harm so severe that status quo must be protected while litigation proceeds. And this case exposes fundamental truth about Trump's second-term governing strategy. Use federal power to punish political enemies. When courts block overreach, claim courts are partisan. When Congress objects, claim Congress obstructing president's authority. When states sue, claim states playing politics. Never actually provide evidence justifying actions, never follow constitutional procedures, just assert power and dare anyone to stop you. What happens next in this case will determine whether federal courts can actually constrain presidential power or whether Trump administration will simply ignore judicial orders. States now have 14 days to file preliminary injunction motions seeking longer-term protection. Trump administration has 14 days to provide actual evidence of fraud justifying $10 billion freeze. Judge will hold full hearing, make final determination whether freeze is legal. But here's critical question. What happens if judge rules freeze unconstitutional and orders funds released? Will Trump administration comply, or will White House claim federal judge has no authority to force president to spend congressionally appropriated funds? Share this video so people understand stakes here. This isn't just about $10 billion in childcare funding. This is about whether constitutional separation of powers still functions, whether Congress retains power of purse, or whether president can unilaterally freeze spending he doesn't like, whether federal courts can enforce their orders, or whether Trump administration will defy judicial authority. Notice what Judge Subramanian carefully didn't say in his order. Didn't rule on ultimate legality of funding freeze, didn't determine whether Trump administration violated Constitution, didn't make final judgment on fraud allegations, just said states met threshold for emergency relief and status quo must be protected while case proceeds. That's judicial restraint. That's proper role of federal courts in emergency situations. Think about broader pattern here. Trump administration has relied heavily on emergency powers throughout second term. Emergency declarations to impose tariffs, emergency orders to deploy National Guard, emergency freezes of federal funding, emergency revocations of security clearances. Every major controversial action framed as emergency requiring immediate presidential action without congressional approval or judicial review. And federal courts keep saying no, that's not emergency. That's power grab. Bottom line is this: federal judges across multiple jurisdictions blocking Trump's emergency orders on everything from election administration to federal funding to military deployments. Courts not saying president has no emergency powers. Courts saying president cannot fabricate emergencies to bypass constitutional constraints on presidential authority. Real emergencies exist. Manufactured crises designed to justify authoritarian actions don't count. Judge Subramanian's emergency injunction represents federal judiciary drawing line in sand. You cannot freeze $10 billion in congressionally appropriated funding to 5 states based on unsubstantiated fraud allegations without evidence, without investigation, without following proper administrative procedures. That's not fighting fraud. That's political retaliation. And Constitution doesn't permit it. This story continues. Stay tuned.